Well, I'm not sure if you heard, but there was a very controversial conference held in Wellington last weekend on Saturday. And I was there. I was actually one of the speakers, and so was Simon O'Connor. And let me just tell you, this is according to the Radio New Zealand report, Te Papa has decided a controversial event at its Takina Conference Centre, which is just across the road from Te Papa, a brand new building, very nice, that it can go safely ahead. The event on Saturday has been organised by Inflection Point NZ to stop what it calls gender indoctrination and medicalisation of children. And it mentions that Simon O'Connor, controversial fella he is one of the speakers. And in a statement on the Thursday before, Te Papa Chief Executive and the Māori co-leader said they would actively monitor the situation. They said, as a museum for all New Zealanders, Te Papa supports the rights of trans people, takatapui, and all members of our rainbow communities. Te Papa will be flying a trans-inclusive rainbow flag on our flagpole on Saturday. End quote. Yes, very nice. As a museum for all New Zealanders, except that group that are going to the conference. So anyway, we turned up to the conference. There were protesters there. One of them threw a bottle of faeces and urine, which actually ended up on some police officers. The local cafe in the conference centre closed down because they were very precious and didn't want their staff to be exposed to us. And interestingly enough, Tori Whanau, the Wellington mayor, turned up to the protest. Now, she has missed apparently half of the meetings that she's supposed to attend on a committee that she's on, but she found time to be at this protest, which only lasted an hour. The conference went for 5 hours. And so I thought today I would share with you my very controversial message to the conference. So buckle up. It's very controversial. Let's check it out. So I have my notes here just to make sure that I stay on track, and I really wanted to just paint a little bit of a history about the gender agenda in New Zealand and how long it's been going on for, but in fact the public are starting to catch up with actually the outcomes and the harms of the ideology. And the first thing I did was show a video clip from 2013 from the news, and my point was that in fact this ideology has been in our schools for at least 11 years. Have a watch.
Family Planning is holding a conference at the moment, and on the agenda is a research paper with the topic entitled Let's Start at the Beginning, Sexuality Education for Year 1 to 4 students. We invited Family Planning onto the show today, but we're told that they're tied up with the conference today.
Family Planning have been constantly arguing that they need to get in at a younger and younger age, and this is not just New Zealand based, this is international based. These groups want earlier access to kids. They want to discuss gender identity, issues like that we just argue is not their domain. We think that parents have that prime responsibility, and what I'd prefer groups to do is empower and resource parents to take on that important role.
Okay, no comments about the hair colour, but this is 2013. It's 11 years ago, and you'll notice Family Planning can't show up to the media interview. Why? Because that's what they've done all the time. They've done it very subtly behind closed doors so that parents don't know what's going on. So that was 2013, and then this clip from 2015.
The Ministry of Education is asking schools to consider uniforms that are gender neutral. It's one of the recommendations included in new curriculum guidelines aimed at improving sex education and diversity for students.
It's part of the Ministry's new sexuality education guidelines for New Zealand schools. The report has found that school uniforms can reinforce gender norms. It suggests schools should think about offering gender-neutral clothing choices to better provide for sexual diversity among students. Other guidelines include reviewing toilet spaces and making sport less gender-specific. Family First believes the guidelines are too extreme.
If Johnny turns up to school deciding that he wants to be a girl for that day, does that mean that he uses the girls' toilets, he changes with the girls before PE, and he plays in the girls' soccer team? That's a recipe for confusion.
Okay, so that's 2015, 9 years ago, and then 2017.
Primary schools are exposing children to sexually explicit images and material that's not appropriate for their age. This, according to conservative lobby group Family First, which is tonight calling for sexual education to be taken out of the classroom. Ryan Boswell has more.
These are just some of the images being used to teach our children about sexuality. Family Planning is showing these puberty cartoons to 9-year-olds in schools and then quizzing them about changes to their body.
Well, I think if any parents actually look at the material that's being put into schools, they'll be concerned about how sexually explicit it is, that it's not age appropriate.
It appears to me that Family First have lifted out instances of examples of things that happened without showing the broader contexts around them and without showing the fact that there's experienced, well-trained sexuality educators that actually facilitate those discussions.
Yes, experienced, well-trained facilitators from Inside Out and Rainbow Youth. And in 2016, so 8 years ago, there was a story about a school in the South Island, a girls' college, that enrolled a biological boy. And they said that the biological boy could use special toilets. I think it was the staff toilets, but no. This biological boy was on a campaign and wanted to use the girls' toilets. The problem was that nobody actually asked the girls what they thought. And we did a campaign about this called Ask Me First. This was a short excerpt of that video.
So beginning of the year, we got news that this student wanted to be in the school, this guy, and the school granted him access. As the year progressed, and he wanted access to the female bathrooms. And at that point, I was like, no, this isn't right. As a girl, I feel uncomfortable with a guy being in the same toilets. There are already gender-neutral toilets in the school. Girls going through puberty and stuff, it can be quite stressful and embarrassing, and knowing that there could be a guy walk in, it's a little bit terrifying to think about that. Girls do like privacy in the bathrooms. We don't like other people hearing us what we do and stuff. Another big issue is younger girls coming to the school, especially for the first time. You don't know what their background is, if they've been sexually abused or not, and walking in and seeing a guy in the toilets could set off something, could trigger something. What happens if someone misuses that and claim to be that but they're not, and that's a little bit scary to think about. What my principal told me, she said if I don't want to use the girls' bathrooms, then there are other toilets I could use, as in the unisex toilets. I don't have to go in the girls' toilets. And that's when I thought, hold on a minute, I'm in an all-girls school with these girls' bathrooms, and you're telling me that if I don't want to use them, I can go to a unisex toilet? It doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. Nobody asked me first.
Ask me first. And then shared the fact that we have put out a number of reports. 2015, we did the Boys, Girl, Other, which looked at the ideology. 2018, we had the Australian paediatrician, Dr. John Whitehall, talk about what actually transitioning involves. And then we did the parent guide, which enabled parents to know exactly what their rights were and what the schools were responsible for doing. But I did warn that the Ministry of Education are pushing this ideology, and I want to show you just a little part of a clip that's on the Ministry of Education website, and you'll see a intermediate school and the gender ideology that's being pushed in the school. You'll see the badge. You'll see all the changes they have made, and listen to the groups that they consult to make these decisions.
Our initial thinking about gender came because we had a child in our school who transitioned. So we worked with Qtopia here in Christchurch and with Inside Out, and had PLD sessions for our staff. One of the things that we looked at as a board was to really look at whether our policies promoted inclusion, and what did inclusion mean, and did our inclusive practices policy actually mention gender. And we felt that it was important, and so we went back to our policies and made sure we wrote that in. They need us to do this to make them feel whole. And so that's what we did. We started seeing gender biases or using gender to organise things in schools where gender wasn't needed to be the way of organising. So an easy one, we don't line up in boys and girls lines anymore. We try really hard not to organise things on the basis of gender.
Race officials talking to the group of children who were lining up ready to do sprints, I noticed the amount of times that they were referred to as boys. Boys listen up, boys step forward, boys do this. And I thought for any child that's gender diverse or questioning, they are hearing a repeated language about gender that might not be helpful for them.
If the way we organise our school keeps on making them have to choose boy or girl and feel uncomfortable, even if it's just inside with that decision, then that's a problem. A really simple thing we looked at was our uniform. And so we took the boys and the girls' headings off. We combined the list into a single list and said uniform, and these are the uniform items. And children and families choose to wear what they feel comfortable in.
We've made a real effort now in our school to make sure that the books in our library reflect diversity. William's doll. Heather has two mummies.
The idea of putting pronouns at the end of your email signature came from some work that we did with Qtopia and Inside Out a couple of years ago, and our teachers in our Year 7 and 8 team chose to put that on their signature. It sends a really strong message.
Yeah, all right, that's enough of that. And it's a pretty strong push, isn't it? And of course, that's why therefore you get schools, and this is a high school north of Auckland that said that there are 112 genders and over 200 sexualities. But there's also programs that go into the school and they use Shortland Street actors so young people can relate to them. And they talk about this myth of gender being separate from sex. Have a watch of this.
This might blow your mind, but sex and gender are two different things.
No.
I know, mind blown.
Your sex is what your doctor assigned you at birth, so male, female, or intersex. Your gender is how you identify, so man, woman, or another term like genderqueer or non-binary.
A good way to remember it is that sex is what's between your legs and gender is what's in your head and your heart.
A lot of forms ask you to tick what your gender is. Most of the time, they look like this, but really, they should look like this.
Before a baby is born, half of what anyone talks about is whether it's going to be a boy or a girl. But just like sexual orientation, gender is a spectrum. It's not as simple as pink or blue.
A spectrum is like a line. So, woman, non-binary, man.
Oh.
And they're all somewhere along the same line.
You might be born with a sex that doesn't...
Yeah, that's enough of that. I mean, you might have learned something there. And this is Shortland Street actors. I mean, Shortland Street's based around a hospital, isn't it? And yet they don't understand basic biology. But we know that the ideology is starting earlier and earlier. We heard back in 2013 they wanted to start at the beginning of primary school. But of course now professional training groups are training early childhood education to do it. And this is an example of a song that they want to teach preschoolers.
Non-binary wizard, I'm a gender fluid witch. I don't know what to call myself except for maybe Wix. It seems as if we're harder to see than...
Yeah, okay, and this one. Yeah, okay, and that's starting at preschool level and talking about pronouns. So then I just showed polling that we'd done. Now, we have done a lot of polling on this issue and other social issues through Courier Market Research. And Courier Market Research, you may have heard of them, they're quoted a lot by the media, except our polling, because generally the media don't like the results of our polling. But let me show you just what New Zealanders actually think about this ideology. And like I say, we've been polling since about 2016, so we've been able to see trends. So here's the first one. Firstly, we found that almost 80% of parents are quite happy to do the sex education themselves, and they say that the government that parents and families should have the final say on what's taught, not the government. We also asked in 2020 about whether sex education should be opt-in or opt-out. Now, currently it's opt-out, but why not make it opt-in? And then those who do want it can use it and can access it for their kids if they so wish. But here's the key questions. Do you believe that primary age children should be taught that they can choose their gender and that it can be changed through hormone treatment? Just under 70% said no. Only 15% want gender ideology taught at primary school. But what's most interesting is we asked this question in 2018. And look at the percentage there, 54 to 35. It was much closer. So opposition has grown. We also asked that should parents don't have to be notified if their child is identifying as trans. Would you support a law requiring schools to notify parents? 55% said yes, 29% said no. Do you support a ban on the use of puberty blockers for young people 16 or younger? Now, this is interesting. 62% said yes, only 19% said no, less than 1 in 5. But look at the figures from 2020 when we asked the question. The opposition, or the support for a ban, should I say, has grown. And that's very important to note. That teacher got deregistered recently for not using preferred pronouns. Should they have been sacked? 65% said no, only 16% said yes. Interesting one on sport. Should boys be able to play in girls' sports? 68% said no, 13%. Only 13% said yes. But we asked this question a couple of times, firstly back in 2018. Look at the figures there, 39% each. So the opposition has grown rapidly to boys playing in girls' sports. We asked, some people have proposed banning puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and physical sex change surgeries for minors, children under the age of 18. Would you support or oppose? 53% support, 24% oppose. And once again, we asked it back 2 years ago in 2022, the support for a ban has grown. This year, just last month, we did some polling and we said if a young person wants to change their gender, should the treatment be primarily based on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, or should the treatment focus on dealing with the underlying mental health issues? 53% said focus on the mental health. Only 10% said use chemicalisation. Should the taxpayer fund these types of treatments? 68% said no, 16% said yes. And just finally, there was that bill by New Zealand First about toilets, having women, men and unisex, and you've got to use the biologically correct one or the unisex one. Do you support that? 56% said yes and 26% said no. So just over a 2-to-1. And the other thing I said is that the media don't report these, so it means that we have to do things like take out ads like this one to actually say what the results are saying, because the media don't want to hear the contrary narrative. And just finally, we did some polling around the conversion therapy, and people sort of said, oh, look, banning conversion therapy sounds good. But when we drilled down to the effects of the bill, for example, on the left there, if a person's unsure about their sexual orientation or gender identity, should they be able to seek counselling? 81% said yes. But of course, that would be possibly treated as conversion therapy. Second question, if a child is confused about their gender, should it be a crime for a parent to affirm their biological sex? 81% said, of course not, and yet it is a crime under the conversion therapy law. And on the right, should it be a crime for faith-based organisations to teach the teaching of their faith? 62% said no. And then we just reminded them about the fact that we've analysed the RSE, sexualityeducation.nz. You can see that report. We've got the fact sheet, which many of you have downloaded, which if somebody says, look, I just don't believe that that's what they're teaching in my schools, just go to sexeducation.nz, download the fact sheet and show them. And finally, we've produced the parent guide, and that gives the legal rights up to date on what the Board of Trustees is able to do. Can you get a meeting? Questions you can ask the school, what your rights are as parents, how to get your children excluded as well, and some more recent examples. So there we are. That is the controversial, shocking, offensive speech that I gave. I'm sure many of you may need a safe space, a cup of tea and a lie down after listening to that. I did just finish with just 3 quick notes, and that was that I reminded people that it's not people that we oppose. We battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. It's the ideology that we oppose. Now, the media always tries to lump it and say that you're anti certain people. It's not. It's anti the ideology that is harming people. And so it's important that we remind ourselves that we're not battling against individuals. The second thing was that in the past, we've struggled in this debate because we haven't had the science, but the science is now coming out in stacks fulls. We've had the Cass report. We've had the exposure of WPATH and their shonky science. We've had reports out of Finland, out of Sweden, and just the recent one out of the US talking about the suicide trope, that parents are told, you know, do you want an alive son or a dead daughter if you don't allow them to transition? And of course, what they're finding is that actually that suicide trope is false. And in fact, the suicide ideation continues even after transition. The latest study found out that it was 12 times after gender surgery. And so we now have the science on our side. The science war has been won on this issue. Now we have to win the culture war. And as you can see from those surveys, the tide is turning. And finally, I reminded them of Reverend Billy Graham's quote that says, when a brave man takes a stand, it stiffens the spines of others. And I reminded the audience that when we are brave, when we stand up for what is right, when we speak up to protect kids, even if cafes close their door, even if there's protesters, even if you get misaligned and told that it's an anti conference in the media, be bold, develop that spine, because when you develop that spine, it actually develops the spines in others around us. And we need to be strong to speak up against this ideology because, let's face it, kids don't need castration and confusion. They need care and counselling. So there we have it. Go and have a cup of tea and a lie down. That was a pretty controversial speech, wasn't it?